So the term diversity and inclusion is so commonplace that I don't know many organizations that doesn't have a DEI initiative or a department or a leader. And that makes me happy. There's a part of me that's like, it looks like we are making progress. But are we making any real progress though? So I am excited because I have got Adam Dumey, my really good friend and super smart guy to help me figure this out. Adam, first off, how are you? And secondly, are we making progress? Is the world, especially particularly the corporate boardroom and corporate America, is it a very diverse place today?
Yeah, well, I'd be doing better if it was. So to directly answer your question, you got to slice diversity in I think two broad buckets. One is your social diversity, so
Mm,
gender, race, ethnicity, that kind of thing, age, and the other is professional diversity. And it's
mm.
interesting if you look at the stats. To answer your question, the answer is no to both of those groups.
Wow.
So, and a lot of people focus on the social side. So this is your podcast. So I'm going to put you on the hot seat for a quick second.
Yep.
So if I were to say a Moss, how old do you think the average age of an S&P 500 board member is? What would you say?
Board member 45, 46.
Okay, 63. Yeah,
Well, that's
60. The average age of a board member on the S&P 500 is
no way.
63. Okay, the average
Wow.
age of a first-time board member is 54. Now that in of itself, right? What is that? Who cares? 78% of these people are white. Okay, and so there's also a male orientation to it. So if you think of where we are, if that is progress, shame on us, but the numbers say not so much. So again, my focus, right? I'm Puerto Rican. And so if I look at the Latino numbers between 2010 and 2020, the percentage increase of representation is one.
So
And
we moved
so,
1 percentage point over a decade.
correct. And if you think
Jeez.
of what happened in that decade and all the social movements that have taken place and all the awakening, I think, at least, I think our conversation is mostly focused on North America. And as we think about everything that took place and all the turmoil for this group, which is trending to be the largest group in
Yep.
America, 1% over a decade is not super stellar, right? And again, if the answer is we are making progress, it's not enough progress.
Yeah. No, that you have dropped a couple of stats on me that is bumming.
Shocking, isn't it?
It's shocking and bumming me out. So to step back, so it sounds like the boardroom, we haven't even gotten in the game. Like that show hasn't even started. I mean, diversity from even when you take social, like put color aside, just age,
That's right.
youth. I mean, we've not moved the dial. We've not moved the dial there at all. But let's back up a little bit. And in your way of kind of really breaking down things, you started to do that for our audience, which is when we keep saying this diversity and inclusion and DEI, all of this. Let's just break it down, at least for the sake of our conversation. This can be a political hot button. I don't know why.
Right. Right.
But what the heck is it? I loved your framing of social and sort of professional, but go a little bit deeper as to like what is it actually is and why? The so what? How did we our shows, how did we get here? How did we even get there? What's the point of this then? Where did we start?
So backing up even further, the whole point about this diversity theme is for what it brings. And you have all these studies that show whether it's investment fund managers, whether it's investment teams or leadership teams, or if it's board members, those with what a quote unquote diverse board just perform well. And there's a reason, right? There are perspectives that are represented. So if I am part of a board for a bank that has a headquarter in Dallas, Texas, it is very hard to make the argument that a 70-year-old white man who had been part of that board for 15 years best knows how to ensure the right strategy for this bank's demographic, which is probably going to be lower income, probably black or brown, how this strategy is meeting that customer demographic. So you want a board that has all those perspectives to ensure that's delivering appropriate shareholder value. So that's just the basic premise
Got it.
of why you want. And again, there's studies that have shown this makes sense. And so hopefully that's the baseline. But if you think of the how we got here with those different groups, the reality is the board composition is really dictated by this inertia of recruiting independent directors from
Right.
either a pool of other independent directors, right? This kind
Right.
of circle, or a pool of current or former CEOs or CFOs who are inherently representative of the board members we have now. So if you're recruiting the same profile through these different channels, nothing's going to change. Right. And so again, from a representation perspective, just from a social, is that the right mix? And then you go to the professional side, right? So we live in a world now of artificial intelligence.
Right.
And so again, and you could pick your board, pick 10 boards. I challenge your listeners, pick 10 boards, go to the board composition profile and investor relations page, check the board age, check the background. And I ask you this, you could pick 10 boards. How many of them have the right trade knowledge to ensure the appropriate strategy is being put forward? Deloitte put forward a very interesting study a couple years ago, and one of the questions stuck out. It was basically, has your board considered nominating another board member with some explicit expertise, a focused domain? You think like cyber, for example, you think things about kind of climate ESG stuff. 65% said no. And so again, and you know what the second most popular answer, Moss, was? Almost half said the board expects members to be at least literate on an issue. So say, hey, you kind of know what you're doing. It's good enough to ensure that stakeholder value is
Oh my
achieved and
God.
realized. And so if you have that premise again on the social side, you're looking at the same kind of people. On the professional side, you're looking at the same kind of people without acknowledging these trends. It puts, I think, shareholders and this precarious fund owners, everyone who has an invested stake in these companies, they should be worried.
Yeah, I want to just go back because I think you said it and some folks may have missed it, which is that an organization decides genuinely, gosh, we want to do better in this area. We want more diverse thinking, because all the studies, I don't need to reiterate them again. It's important. But then what they do is, how do we then recruit boards, right? We recruit them from former C-suite members, which historically has been non-diverse, right? That's not a controversial statement. So you're going to end up in the same place, right? You go out and go target people who have been on boards, which again, we've talked about historically has not been this. And I wonder, Adam, is why it seems like what most companies are good at with the board is call it the financial engineering side. I don't mean that in any pejorative sense, but I feel like boards are getting someone who is good at, quote unquote, aligning stock-based compensation with the CEO. I don't want to open that kind of worms with the C-suite. And like they've kind of, the same thinking goes on in every single company, right? So you end up with insert company here in the S&P 500. The CEO is sort of compensated the exact same way, plenty of stock options, a lower base, quote unquote, aligning his interest with that of the shareholders. And I haven't seen an original idea come out of boards in a while. I've not heard like, oh my gosh, this board member who has deep expertise in this thing is now driving. Those things are few and far between. And so if I think about the problem we're trying to solve, is like all the goodness you might get out of diverse thinking and diverse opinions and diverse groups, you're just not getting it because you're not getting diversity. And I think, Adam, you've nailed where this self-fulfilling prophecy is like you claim you want to make your board look different by doing the same thing you've been doing for a millennia, right? Like,
That's right.
and so
right.
you're just running in circles. So what should we, if I think about that, then talk a little bit about, I think people get, here's the problem, and I can hear the audience asking, okay, so how would you solve it? Let's talk a little bit about, now that I think we've nailed this problem statement, I want to talk a little bit about what potentially good should look like. Imagine for a second that you have now been given the task of solving this problem for an S&P 500 company, and they say, Adam, hey, I heard you on this thing. We have this problem. What would you do differently?
Yeah, so as you know, I'm lukewarm to the idea of consultants,
Yeah.
but I think there is an advantage in having an independent group assess your board composition aligned with the company with which you're kind of pledged to protect and stakeholder group that you need to operate under. And so I think having a third party do an audit of your board, not only the composition, but the operations, the culture, because one of the things kind of frustrating, especially a person of color, is everyone talks about the diversity as just a number, but the reality is you can have a diverse group, but the culture is one that doesn't warrant and support
Mm,
the feedback mechanism, right? The
right.
inherent element of listening and the inherent component of taking this feedback into action. Right. And so, yeah, you have a diversity in a composition, but you also need a culture that really kind of embraces that. And so having another group come in, and remember, right, it starts from the top. The chair of the
Right.
board oversees the succession planning, the onboarding, the evaluation, right? Ensuring that the current members align with the strategy, and et cetera. And so having that chairwoman understand this is, KPMG, the Deloitte, the McKinsey, all those, right? This is what the board audit reveals, and then to take action. So I think having that grounding, especially if you think of, every board member has some director's insurance should things go south, right? This
Right.
is a nice CYA as well, right? There's, I think, more practical elements, but from a chairman perspective, I think this will ground the world in, we brought an auditor in, we're acting upon some of that feedback. So I think number one is just getting an assessment. Number two is the culture side that I think is really important. And number three, I think it's really important that we start doing more measurements on the actual outcome of these events.
Mm,
So, we've spoken before about this check the box mentality, right? We've increased the number of women from 0 to 4, which is great. Let's track that to the performance of the company, right? Let's track that to, you mentioned compensation. Let's track to our compensation practices against our peers. Let's show in this context definitively that this composition, the strategy that we're embarking, it's having an impact. And I think, I think that kind of sets the stage for some data-driven conversations about how this model is proven and it can be replicated elsewhere. That's the one thing that I think is missing. And I think that the fourth part is just communication and disclosure. So again, there's one thing to state on your investor relations page, this is how we've changed. There's another thing to be proud of it, right? To tell your employees that this is something that you have done actively based on good business, based on customer feedback, something to tell all the pension funds that hold these stocks, here's what we're doing voluntarily, not because you're threatening to reallocate funds out of my company elsewhere, but this is something we're doing and something we're proud of and something that's part of our DNA. That element of ownership, that element of this is who we are and this makes sense. That's, I think, another element that's missing.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. I am really struck by that, let me call it the ROI comment you made, which is we have these countless studies now of organizations. These are not small companies, right? Like large corporations who have done this. And I've even seen those same organizations slid back and the performance
Mhm.
suffer as well. And not enough is talked about. Like the myth I want to just bust on this show is that this is some feel good, do good nonsense. I don't want my corporations be trying to, nah, I leave that to my nonprofits. There is a direct, you don't need to think that deeply about it,
That's right.
right? Like I worked for Coca-Cola many years ago, right? Wasn't at the board level, but I can just tell you the impact of diverse thinking in products, in distribution.
Mhm,
I can
mhm,
just tell you, you're Latino, and I can just tell you like little subtle things that because we had people from those communities
mhm,
lead
mhm,
in some of those groups that made decisions that has helped Coca-Cola defend and grow market share
mhm, mhm,
in communities. And you can just sort of see it. Like you would like to just stay on Coca-Cola because everyone can kind of connect to it. You would, in my case, I live in Oklahoma City, not, the most diverse place in the world, but I would go into like a Mexican store and the thoughtfulness you would see a
mhm,
giant corporation like Coca-Cola that they've stocked because I'm looking for like glass bottles of and all the thought that someone had said, oh, it's Oklahoma City, but hey, Oklahoma City has this da 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 da. And I wonder, Adam, whether, okay, that same company, not to pick on my former employer,
You're doing
who,
such a great job, though. Keep going. Don't stop now.
who figured it out lower in the organization, right? By the time it gets to the C-suite, where they could amplify, where they could be like, let me stay on this analogy. Like, if I wanted to dominate the Latino market, the fastest, what will be the largest market here pretty soon? If you imagine if you now had the appropriate representation all the way to the top, holy moly, right? Like your ability to just, I'm just using that one slice, but something happens between that middle career person who's doing such a great job that I went to an all employee meeting way back in the day, this is in the early 2000s when I worked there, and they put this super impressive gentleman in there who was in charge of our strategy and LATAM and da da da. You know what? I we're still connected, and he's not in the C-suite. He's left the company, and he's like, where like there's something happens where they tactically you get it, and then you lose the ability to amplify it. So I almost wonder if there's a missing link there where a different set of people or ideas gets to the top and looking for board members, because I do see elements of companies being thoughtful about diversity in sales and marketing. And by the time it gets to the C-suite and the board, it's all gone. I wonder if you have any kind of theories or thoughts about where that chain gets broken.
Yeah, so three responses, kind of starting at the top. It's important to remember the purpose of the board. They have a fiduciary responsibility to stakeholders, so they're not going to run the company. There's a leadership team for that.
Mhm.
But I think the point you're making is valid. There is a gap between the people that are on the line, and as you move up in your career, you move further from the line. Then first you're a seller, let's say, then you manage sellers, then you manage content. And so you become so far removed from what's actually what's happening on the line. If you don't have that right mechanism and that right culture feedback, right, that whole iceberg of ignorance challenge, right, that we've discussed before. But I think it also highlights one of the problems from a board composition. So if you think of, again, artificial intelligence, for example, and you think of some of these CEOs that have been retired 5 years, again, I started in AI 10 years ago. CEO 5 years ago, I can tell you for sure, probably doesn't know anything about artificial intelligence. And so as you think about, again, keeping the fiduciary responsibility, ensuring the strategy is appropriate, having a person like that from an operations perspective makes a lot of sense. Having a person that is closer to the line, so to speak, the one that's currently advising these CEOs on their strategy is the one that's going to be able to identify, well, right, if you change your product mix and infuse this AI just at a loose level, you're going to have to change your sales model. Your pricing is going to change, your distribution channel. And by the way, your change management have to be double now because you have a staff that wasn't accustomed to it. And how are you going to manage that and balance new versus existing employees? There are all these considerations that a person can be better prepared to address versus bringing in a consultant. And so I think if the trajectory continues to be, we're going to be looking for these 55-year-old people that are retired or former C-suite versus looking at people that aren't at that level, but have a much closer affinity for what's happening in the market, we're going to have some challenges in the future, right? There are going to be a bit more, I won't say scandal, but a bit more challenges that the board's going to have to deal with, whether that's through activist claims that maximum value isn't being achieved, whether it's a culture of underperformance and that long tail. But the mix has to change. The people, I think your point is very astute. The people that are most well versed in what is going on, not just for a micro, but more of a macro environment, those are the people I think can be really helpful as we think about board recomposition. And by the way, that's not a social statement.
No,
that is a professional diversity statement that I hope we can all agree to.
I could not agree with you more. I was involved with an organization recently who was trying to take this on, right, from a nonprofit standpoint, working with these organizations to prepare the next deal. And one of the things I liked about their deal, and I think they're probably doing that to diffuse some of this because people end up going to color and history of our country and how that kind of deal is, like they brought the whole segment, right? gender, age, right, backgrounds, etc., language, all of that, and what it exposed. Like Adam, if you just go to age, and oh, by the way, if you're listening to this and have anything to do with this, like if you just actually try to solve this thing by age, the stat Adam this, you will stumble your way into some of the other social characteristics.
That's right.
Like,
That's right. That's
right,
right.
because I'll be willing to bet
That's
that
right.
as you go further down, it gets more and more diverse. That's been the story of our not, that's not enough.
That's
But
right.
if you just look to just solve two or three of them, you just picked a couple of them and make that, let's fix this, then you'll start to get there. But great conversation. We usually end this conversation by talking about some things you learned, or an
Well,
interesting thing that happened this week. And I'll go first. Mine's pretty tame by my standards this week. I got one of these LinkedIn messages we all get now that's trying to sell you something. And, your
they're
modus
pretty
operandi.
aggressive now, aren't they? There's been this
Oh!
influx of these messages that are not. I mean, you talk. Sorry to interrupt, but you talk about again this idea of personalization, understanding your customer. There is zero reason that I want to take a Cisco networking class. No offense to Cisco, but there's nothing in my profile that would suggest that. So to get these requests, if anyone's watching from Microsoft, just a request to
Please.
button up this approach.
Please listen. I get this message. And I usually ignore them and move on about my day, but this one was double egregious. It called me Jerry, which is not my name. Nothing wrong with being a Jerry, but it's not my name. And it was also trying to pitch me on this pretty entry level gig, which concerned me because I'm like, okay, there is some algorithm. That was the only reason I responded. I was like, how did I get on this list? I thought I've done a pretty decent job on my LinkedIn profile. Clearly not. So I hit reply and just innocuously thinking I'll get a sense of humor. I'm Gary, and why did you think I would want this kind of thing? Big mistake. If you're listening, do not do that. I then get involved in at least 10 message back and forth. I had time on my hands. So
Never want to back down from online dialogue. You are. That's right.
we're going back and forth that ends in my own conviction, where it ends up with, well, then you should have never responded. And I go, you know what? You were right. Guilty as charged, because he or the robot or whatever I was talking to did not slow down. It's like, sorry, your name's not Jerry, it's Amos, but do you want this thing? And I'm like, did you read any of this? Because I am trying to fix your system here and give you some feedback. And it was just straight on, do you want this gig or not? And it ended up with me saying I should have never responded. So Adam, what about you? What cool thing or interesting thing happened to you in the last week or so?
So in the spirit of what you just said, so experience has been awful. So we've talked about this car accident I've had, almost 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, I already shared the day of challenges. After the day, things have been great, except this past weekend, I received a message. One of the questions I had was rental reimbursement. How do I do that? And so attach it here, Adam. Oh, and by the way, we haven't determined if you're liable or at fault or not.
Okay.
So we'll let you know. And so again, just like, the School of Amos, I responded, I'm confused because on this date, the website explicitly says, we found that you are not at fault and will be paying. What has changed? Feedback to that almost instantaneously was, we're waiting on video from the county. We'll let you know. To which I cut and paste my response, on this date, you can, and we went through this 3 times and I still don't know. So now, I sent the note. We've been customers of this insurance company for, I don't know, 18 years or so, had 2 accidents. I would argue none are faults, although apparently that's still an outstanding question. And so, I sent this note back from a customer perspective. You've already told me that I'm not at fault. So either you have a flawed process, for which that's not my problem, you have already told me this, or you're getting ready to have me pay these bills because I'm at fault, because it's too expensive. I don't know what the case is. So I didn't learn anything this week. I'm just shocked that this
Oh
is the
no,
state of affairs.
you learned you learned that I am going to be busy for the rest of my life because customer service and
Just
customer
a
experience.
minivan, again, it's this old idea of a digital handshake. If you say to a customer, this has happened, your recourse to go back, I don't care what's in the fine print, but your recourse to go back, especially when there are dollars involved, and change that agreement, I just think is immoral. And so
It's
we'll see what happens, but
we'll see.
this is my week.
I am waiting for the conclusion of the saga. We've gotten, if you listen to the last episode, we had Adam on. You got part one of this. You
Oh
got
boy.
the start. We get the middle now, and Adam will be back to tell us how this thing ended. Adam, it's been awesome having you on. I learned some things today about this. Hopefully, we contributed to folks' understanding about board representation, and maybe in our small way, we can begin to influence organizations to do something different. Good talking with you, man.
All right, see ya. Bye, everyone.
You've been listening to an Amos Talks production.